Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Good Girls, a great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really appreciate kind of seeing where our trio, are currently standing with everything. Obviously, we see them working regular jobs. Obviously, there's been very, shifts since last season, because obviously they're trying to get into this whole counterfeit money situation, kind of take their swing at it. It's being a very slow process. I even love that JT is a part of this too. He's their dude to check and see. He's like, no, this isn't quite right. He's like, this is kind of messed up, because Annie's the one that kind of does the rough designing of the counterfeit stuff. But he's like, yeah, it's not going to work. And they try it doesn't work. So they put all this time and effort. It took them 3 weeks to kind of get this particular one down. But in the end, it wasn't a good enough thing. I mean, and that's, things aren't going well on the counterfeit front, but on their personal situations, they're not going that great either. It's really interesting. Let's start off with Beth. The fact of the matter is they're falling behind on their bills and stuff like that, the mortgage in particular. What's also interesting is that Beth has this complicated thing where, she's hanging out with Rio's baby mama. That's really interesting. It's like, you're hanging out with the mother of the child, Rio's son's mom, and Rio's kid. I completely fucked that all over. I'm sorry. I apologize. But even I love when Annie and Ruby found out about it. Like, what are you doing? Hanging around? You killed him. And he's like, and for Beth, that's what this is all about, because she feels guilty, especially because Rio's kid is thinking his dad's going to pop up at any point in time. Because even his mom is kind of thinking Rio kind of comes and goes. The fact of the matter is, but he always kind of looks out. He always sends money and stuff like that, making sure we're taken care of. And obviously she feels guilty about it, because she even says it later on. She doesn't miss Rio, even though they had the very complicated relationship they did. The fact of the matter is, she's kind of she just feels bad, because no child should grow up without their father. And it's the thing of it wasn't something she was just thinking about at the time of I'm taking away someone's, she wasn't thinking about it in that moment. But obviously, she's trying to make sure, she's trying to make sure that they're taken care of. Wants Rio's son to be taken care of, make sure he has anything he wants. It's she's trying to make sure it's oh, no, you have this, you can have that. And she's his mom is no, you don't have to do all that. And but for Beth, it's she feels like she has to kind of compensate for the fact is that, hey, I killed his dad. Also, interestingly enough, Charlene Yee popping up there. I'm like, yo, Charlene. I want to say the last TV show I saw her in was House. No, actually, it's Lucifer, because she played, spoilers, she played one of his siblings in one episode of Lucifer. Regardless, it's tangents and all that. But she plays Lucy, and I love that they basically bring Lucy into the phone. And I love the whole thing of we don't really know much about Lucy. She could be a Noah. She could be a Mary Pat. And it's we don't have to tell her everything. It's we didn't tell Mary Pat everything, and she ended up being the situation she was. I was I'm curious where that stands, because last time we never got a full resolution to the whole Mary Pat situation. I'm curious about that though, because obviously the actress who plays Mary Pat, Allison, obviously was doing Emergent, so I wonder, did that kind of play a role in? You never know in these type of situations, but I'm curious. I was just kind of which I should also note, whenever I saw, because I watched Emergence before I watched the Good Girls, so I was no, don't ruin Joe in my mind. It's a whole thing, just the way my mind works. But nevertheless, there's that whole situation, and I love they're trying to convince her to work with them. It's oh yeah, it's for a charity. What kind of charity? For gamblers? Wait, you want to make this type of stuff for gamblers? And it's just yeah. I even love that whole bit where it's just kind of it's all the presidents, Hamilton, tens with President Hamilton. It's Hamilton wasn't president. It's yeah, he was. And then Ruby is actually he wasn't. And then starts listing, and then it's the whole thing of what about so-and-so? That also not a president. He's wow. And Annie acted like she was so devastated, she'd been lied to her entire life. It's because she had brought up Ben Franklin and Beth was like, also not a president. But the fact is, she is like, had there been any presidents on our money? And then they proceed to mention presidents that have been on money. I love that bit so well. But that was really interesting. But they end up finding a way around it. And obviously, Lucy is really good at what she does, because when JT looks at it, they're like, all right, what's the issues with this one? He's like, actually, there's nothing. Put it through machine, boom, it goes through with flying colors. It's like, yo, they got some legit counterfeit money now. Like, Lucy did a really, really good job. On the other side of things, there's a whole situation with Ruby where Stan is working at a quote-unquote gentleman's club. It's a strip club. And I kept looking at, like, the first, like, I think her name's, like, isn't her real name, like, Diane, the one that shows up at their house later, but the one that was talking about, like, oh, like, how should I heat this up? It's like, oh, double hit it for potato twice. Her, I was like, why do I recognize her? She was in the show Anger Management, the Charlie Sheen show on FX. She was one of his patients. I was like, yeah, it clicked in my head. I was like, dude, that's nuts. I kept being like, where do I recognize her from? I believe that's the thing. Like, I kind of best know her for, but regardless. I love that whole thing of, like, her just walking around with her boobs out. And obviously, we all know that Ruby has the best, like, facial reactions in the show. And just kind of her just being like, really? You just go have this casual conversation with your boobs out? And then she's leaning all over Stan, like, oh my god, look at your kids, they're so cute, oh, it looks just like you and stuff. And she's like, excuse me, like, why you know? So that's that whole situation. So obviously Ruby doesn't like the whole situation, just because it's a whole complicated thing of, like, yeah, for one, it's like, she feels like it's obviously a demeaning job for Stan, because obviously he ended up becoming a cop. Obviously that kind of all got taken away, but also at the same time, it's like, it's, being bothered by the fact is that he works there too. Granted, it's a situation that, yeah, it bothers Ruby, but she kind of doesn't have, she can't really, for her, she's like, I can't put too much, into it, because it's like, Stan is, it's a job, it's the only income we're kind of, well, I mean, obviously she has her job working at a nail salon as well, but it's like, this is like the only job that Stan will be able to get, considering everything, so beggars can't be kind of choosers in that situation. Plus they're, tight for money, because obviously they got to, their daughter, like, paying for, like, her medication and stuff like that, because things aren't being covered. I even love that, like, Ruby was going off on what was that lady on Gwen, because it was about the insurance, but the insurance will only cover the pills under emergency situations. And it's like Ruby kind of being devastated, because it's like the pills are meant to prevent emergency situations, so it's like, that's kind of sad. But then also, like, Gwen saw, like, the fact of the matter is their branch is being closed down and being moved to Sri Lanka, and it's like, I guess I just have to move in with my back home. And it's like, oh, you're there with your, yeah, she's like there with her grandmother, and she's like, yeah, but my grandmother's in my room, so I'm gonna have to sleep on the floor. It's like, well, sleeping on the floor, it's better for your back. And, like, Ruby's just kind of feeling guilty, but it's also like, lady, I got my own problems to deal with. I'm gonna be, hoping everything kind of works out for you, Gwen. So that was really interesting. I also love that bit about, like, it's like, because her daughter can't, she's like, yeah, I don't want to swallow these pills. It's like, oh no, the reason why you don't swallow it is because your gag reflex. And she's talking about, and then she proceeds to go into depth discussion about, like, basically how to, like, get yourself in a position to swallow it. And you can see just the look on Ruby's face as the, like, the conversation is kind of being muffled, and just being like, what are you teaching my daughter? Shut your mouth type of situation. I love it. And it's like, she's like, okay, what if you could get that down, you could get anything down. I'm like, the innuendos. I mean, that's the whole point of it. But it's like, this was so good. Once again, Ruby's facial reactions to this, just, it makes it priceless. So there's that side of things. There's a whole situation with Annie as well, because obviously Annie's, obviously trying to be the more responsible parent. Well, always tries to be, but obviously, like, some rando dude shows up at her place, and he's like, oh yeah, like, we kind of shacked up that one time, and you were saying, like, oh, kind of hit me up. And I even love him being like, oh, like, you want me to, I mean, would it be cool if I just came in and kind of did my thing and you watched? And she just slowly closes the door in his face. But obviously it's a thing of, like, it's like, yeah, because, Chris, and then Sadie corrects her, and it's like, oh, you mean Kevin? And it's like, for, her, it's like, I'm not going to do this whole situation no more of just kind of like, kind of being like taking more pride in herself. But like, yeah, no more, because I'm kind of a, strong, independent woman. I don't need some random dude. But Sadie kind of, I don't know if Sadie intentionally did it. I think it was unintentional, being like, oh yeah, you're kind of like those llamas. And it's like at the zoo and you're like, I don't get the comparison. Well, it's basically like someone holds something out, you kind of come running and kind of eat. It's kind of like any person that kind of shows you any kind of attention, you just kind of end up sleeping with. And just, it's sad because Annie just kind of crumples up a little bit. It's like, that's not where I was going to go with my analogy. And she even brings it up to Ruby and Beth. It's like, it basically makes a reference to like a horrendous crash. It was just kind of a situation that was compounded upon itself. And she's like, is my life like that? Is my life a mess like that? Ruby and Beth don't even answer. They're just kind of, and then Ruby's like, which car are you in that analogy? And it's like, that's obviously not the answer Annie wants. And then I love it. That is just like, obviously she's getting restless and stuff like that. And it's just like, all right. She proceeds to like pull out a vibrator. I'm like, okay. And you can hear it go, I'm like, oh, batteries. I was like, oh, dude, come on. She's going to get it up. Doesn't work. I'm like, oh, I was like, oh, dude, this sucks. And then it's like, all right. She gets up and she's looking for batteries. I was like, oh, God, just to get your rocks off, dude. This is a bummer, dude. And she's looking around and then she's can't find batteries. She looks into, the smoke alarm and it's like, nope, the batteries are gone, which is like, oh, that's an issue in itself. But it's like, did you already take the batteries out of that for a remote? Well, no, I would assume like, don't tell me the ones that are actually dead inside your vibrator are actually the ones. So the meaning you already took them and it's like, crap, I never replaced them. And then like she's walking by the bathroom and she sees a toothbrush, which my mind went like, isn't that? I would assume. I'm going to go ahead and say what my filthy mom was. I was like, isn't that your kid's toothbrush? It's like, no, it's obviously her own toothbrush because she would never use her kid's toothbrush for that. I mean, that'd be super many levels of disturbing, but it's just, so, like I said, I think I just assumed because of like, it was a SpongeBob. Like, I don't know why I just assumed that, but obviously it was her own toothbrush. I was like, because I was thinking like, oh, you're going to take the batteries out. And then she has it. I'm like, oh, I mean, well, that makes sense. And she proceeds to use it. And I'm like, oh, this is, and then music starts playing. I'm like, oh, this is awkward. And then it speaks and she throws it. I was like, that scene was so beautiful. I love it. I was like, dude, that one legitimately like broke me. I love that scene so much. Why? Because that scene is just the antithesis of Annie in general. Like that scene in its entirety is just like, that's so Annie. That's just how I looked at it. But nevertheless, obviously, things have kind of worked out, for Beth because of the whole thing of like, because her new friend, helped her out and everything, which I love that whole thing with Dean, like, oh, can we not use the word friend? Because obviously that kind of gives me a little, PTSD, and it's like, no, like one of like mommy friends. It's just like, oh, okay, like a legit friend. And he's like, cool. So I love that whole situation, which I was curious, like, did Dean know the whole situation? Because he does, because they make jokes about Rio, and it's like, yeah, the whole thing about, it's like, oh yeah, like one of our kids plays that zombie game. What if he came back as a zombie? I was like, oh, I mean, I guess it makes sense to kind of make Dean feel a little bit more at ease. I mean, Dean wanted Rio dead anyway, so he's dead. I mean, quote unquote dead. I also love the fact is that they went through all that trouble of like, counterfeiting all that money, and it took Turner showing up one time to be like, it's like, the fact is he's all up in their business and he plans. So it's like, oh, I feel like I should, step, keep an eye on you, kind of come back around more frequently. So it's like, yeah, they can't do anything, so doing anything with the counterfeit money is just going to draw more attention to them, especially if Turner's going to be so invested in them. In particular, he's always been the most invested in Beth because he, she's the ringleader in all this whole situation. So there's that whole thing in itself. But, obviously Rio's helping him and everything, and it's like, all right, so what do you plan on doing after this? And obviously Rio talked about his plans and stuff like that, and obviously he's selling out his gangs and stuff like that. But then there's this interesting element to it where it's like, all right, it's like at the end, it's like Turner goes to the place, and I'm like, at first I was like, oh, it's gonna be a setup, isn't it? He opens it up and the place is empty. I'm like, oh, it kind of. I was like, huh. I was like, how'd that go? I was like, I was expecting in that moment you'd be surrounded by guns or something like that, but I was like, no. I'm like, huh, maybe. And I'm like, okay, so Rio was messing with you. I'm like, but why would? You? But then it's like the van starts rolling up. I'm like, it's a hit. I guess my mind, delving into the criminal side of things, I'm assuming Rio gave Turner like small places of like, oh yeah, you think you're hitting big spots and stuff like that, which maybe you're hitting, moderately big spots, but there's spots that's kind of like, all right, this and this. Maybe it's a thing of like, you hit these specific spots, it lets them know like, all right, like the next spot is going to be this one. Maybe like Rio had already set things up to be like, all right, this is going to be our plan. If anything ever goes down, this spot get hit, that means set up for this one. Rio either called it, like either Rio like changed his mind last second after helping him take down those smaller things, or like this, like I said, I feel like it was more so like a gradual thing of making Turner think like, oh, he's got the edge up, that Rio's kind of where Turner wants him to be, and so it's like revealing all this information, so it's like giving him these little bites, and then he kind of get him a little too greedy, and he goes for like a final blow, and it ends up blowing him in his face, because I was actually surprised by that. I didn't expect him to end up dead. That was a real big surprise for me. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Granted, it works out for our heroes, because which is still kind of weird to refer to them as our heroes, but it's like it works out for our trio, because it's like, yeah, he's no longer in their business, so it's like, hey, we can get back to business. Granted, Rio's still alive, and obviously they don't know that, and so that's going to turn ugly, because obviously it's like, Beth shot him and left him for dead. Because the entire time, too, there was that whole argument about Beth being like, it's like, I killed someone, so it kind of changes you. And I love Ruby being like, well, I shot someone, too. It's like, yeah, but you shot someone in the toe. Like, she killed someone, you kind of just shot his toe off. And then, like, Annie proceeded to make that whole analogy about the chicken or whatever, and then Ruby's like, no, I actually don't know what you're talking about. She's like, oh, well, cows are so chill, and chickens, they run around and stuff like that. And then I love Ruby, when Annie walks away, Ruby's like, why is she so weird? But nevertheless, like I said, a lot of really interesting things. They still never revealed who Rio really is in the grand scheme of things. Being able to kind of be in that position that he's in, this has been my thought for a while. And I think that's going to be the reveal they end up revealing. I mean, consider that was even a conversation of like when he left everything to Beth and everything, like it seemed like the scale of his operation is like, who is Rio? It's like, Rio's not just some regular, like low level, like banger or something. It's like, nah, he's got to be top dog. And that's the thing. Like, I think whereas Beth and Ruby and Annie kind of seem unassuming, and kind of the point is that you underestimate them. The fact is, I think that's what Rio goes for. Like, granted, maybe he's just a higher up lieutenant, but just the way things are, I feel like this whole thing is his operation. It's not just like, oh, he's part of this. It's like, no, like, I mean, to be fair, we've seen instances of him running things. So I think he's like, not just like small level. Like, he might be like head honcho cartel, Hefe level, boss level. That's my assumption. I've been thinking that for a while. Subsequently, when watching the show, I was like, they've never actually gone out of their way to say that. Granted, they've shown him at a boss level running operations, but you never really get to officially see where he stands in the grand scheme of things. If like I said, is he high ranking, but does he work for someone else? Or is he top dog? I'm implying that I think he's top dog. I think we'll kind of get more into that now, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward this season, Because obviously they all, walked away from the criminal life, publicly, in the sense, like, obviously Stan thinks Ruby walked away, and obviously Dean thinks, Beth walked away. I am curious, like, what Annie's situation with her ex is going to be like now, Sadie's dad, just because it's like, well, because, that's a complicated thing too, because we've never circled back around to that, because obviously the last thing we kind of dealt with was like him being like, yeah, like Noah, he kind of felt like Noah was a douche, and it's like, it's because I'm a douche, he's like, so I can sniff out another douche. So that's the last thing we've seen in that. Like, obviously it's like, Nancy had the baby and everything, so it's like we haven't really circled back to that. So I'm curious to kind of get that side of things this season too. But it's like going back to kind of keeping that criminal life secret. I mean, once again, they're still amateurs at this. Obviously, they're trying to go more big leagues with this. But like I said, with all these new developments on the horizon, I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.